Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Anderson. I'm assistant football coach here at Erskine College in Due West, South Carolina. To give you a little bit of background upon myself, I've been coaching now for 32 years, and I've coached at every level from the high school level to the professional level, and I've been a head coach and offensive coordinator or both in Europe in 4 different countries with 6 different teams. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to be here to talk about the run and shoot offense, an offense that I've been studying my entire coaching career. And when I've had the opportunity to be a coordinator is the offensive choice that I run. Today, I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit about some topics that don't normally come up, or really to get to some brass tacks information about the run and shoot offense, especially for high school coaches. I know that there's been, a pretty big insurgence of the run and shoot coming back at the high school level. Maybe for a coach that is looking to transition into this offense, or maybe a coach who's just coming in to a new school and trying to see where his kids fit in the grand scheme of things. So I thought that we kind of talk about some of those things, and then we'll talk about some pass route concepts and things of that nature, which you would normally see. Kind of talk a little bit about the history of the offense. I wanted to go back even a little bit farther and, for instance, talk about a gentleman who used to coach at TCU back in the 1930s to 1950s, and his name was Leo Dutchmeyer. And he has a book out, and if you can get it on Amazon or some of those other places where you can get books, it's called Spread Offense Football. And really, it was the first spread type offense that you would consider a spread offense. And he had a gentleman named Sammy Baugh as his quarterback at TCU. So that's the reason why they went to this style of offense. And for instance, his 2 primary formations were this. All right, that was one formation of his. It was an even formation. And basically what they had was 2, you could either call them back then 2 running backs or 2 quarterbacks in at the same time, because you had the opportunity to either direct snap to this player here or direct snap to this player here. And that was Sammy Baugh back in the day. The other formation that they would run, and then, for instance, this gentleman here, he could be on this side of the ball, or he could be on this side of the ball here, depending on the strength of the formation. The other formation that they would run was what we would consider an empty formation. And, they would have specific run plays, traps, counters, things of that nature. I've actually tinkered with some of this stuff out of the book when I was coaching in Poland, with some direct snaps and some traps and different things, just to make some things fun and interesting for my players. But Coach Meyer, if you can find that book, it is definitely the jewel of my coaching library as far as the older books that I own. And I think that was published around 1952, 1955, somewhere around in there. It's definitely the oldest coaching book that I have, and it's a great read. And back then, you have those books with the photos, the sequence of photos of how plays were run, unlike the videos and things that we have today. So I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of background about, even though we're talking run and shoot type of offense, but this coach was way ahead of his time, developing a passing offense back in the 30s through the 50s when nobody threw the ball. And the reason was because he was able to find Sammy Baugh and bring him to TCU. And we all know that, Sammy Baugh is a Hall of Famer, and the NFL and in college Hall of Fame as well. Now, most coaches are, I would say, know about this book here. And this is the book by Tiger Ellison. This is the reprint. Now, I actually have an original copy as well. This was actually the first coaching book that I ever purchased as a young coach back in 1989. And so a lot of people are familiar with this book and some of the information in this book that we'll talk about in a little bit. The only other book that was really a good book written on the subject was in the early 90s, and some of you guys have been able to see this. It's called Coaching Run and Shoot Football by Al Black. I had the opportunity to meet Coach Black right after that book was published, and those are the two really good sources. Like, for instance, with the Tiger Ellison book, kind of a history and genesis of the offense and how different coaches branched some of those concepts out. And like I said, the Coach Black book is a good resource as well when you're just kind of wanting to read on the topic and gain some information. So let's talk about the history. If we don't know the history about it, obviously Tiger Ellison was a high school coach in Ohio, and he was at a high school. They were having a lot of rough seasons, I guess you would say. They weren't being real successful, and he was, for what I understand, he was watching some kids throw a football in a park, and they're running and catching and things of that nature, and that's where the idea of his offense took place. Now, before he got to his run and shoot offense, people are maybe familiar with the Lonesome Pole Cat. Now, a lot of teams will use this formation for extra point field goal. But his first formation this is what they called the Lonesome Pole Cat. And he was an eligible receiver at the end of the line of scrimmage. So he would be the center, and he would directly snap it to the quarterback, who was right there. And then they had some different plays that they ran off this formation. They had an overload to this side. They'd throw to receivers on this side. If we had more of an overload towards the three receiver side, they'd throw a screen to this running back over here, and then they would just mush. Or if they called what they called a live pole cat, then they would pull everybody down the line of scrimmage along with him, and the quarterback would roll this way and run like a screen or something like that. And Coach Ellison, he broke up the defensive area into 6 quadrants. Now, the top quadrants were red, white, and blue. And then the bottom quadrants were Boston. I don't know how he got that, but you had heaven, hell, and Boston. And this break was about, I would say, probably 10 yards in that area. And that's how he would, in the polecat, that's how he determined on where the receivers would go. One receiver would be going to white, another one would be going to red, another one would be going to blue, or what have you. And that's how he determined where those receivers were going based on those calls. And then after that, as you'll see in his book, then you came to what he had his base formation. And so once he moved from the polecat, then he developed this base formation, this double slot, one bag type of formation. And with that, there, if you read in the book, there's about four or five different series. Yeah, there's a offense. There's like 4, 5, 6 different series that he developed based out of that formation. And with that coming, being said, talk about the expansion of the offense. Now, obviously here, we have Tiger at the top. Now, the way that I explain it to people is that through that book, there is basically two veins of ideas that came from coaches with reading that book. And obviously, you had Miles Davis, who we're all more familiar with, developed his offensive system based on Tiger Ellison's formation. And what he did was created a passing offense first with very structured passing concepts and route conversions that were, again, something that was more of greater detail than what Tiger Ellison did with their receivers and things of that nature. Now, the other person that this offense, some ideas and concepts came, is someone where some people may not be very familiar with, and that is Coach Red Fong. Now, Red Fong, he was the head football coach at Franklin University in Indiana from 1957 to 1988, which is a Division III school in Indiana. And then he became the offensive coordinator at Georgetown College in Kentucky for the 1990-91 seasons, and then back in 1997. And in 1991, Georgetown College won the NAIA National Championship. Now, his version of the run and shoot offense kind of more correlates towards the Tiger Ellison version of the offense. That they use similar passing concepts. There's a lot of wing tee type of flavor, in his style of offense. So those are the two major trains of thoughts that came out of the Tiger Ellison book. And then I talk about what I consider the third spoke, and that is John Jenkins. Now, what John Jenkins did with the offense, that obviously a lot of people know that he was with the Houston Gamblers in 1984, 1985, 1984 when Mouse was the offensive coordinator there. John Jenkins was the special teams coordinator there and worked with receivers, if I remember correctly. And what he did in expanding the offense was the splits that in a traditional formation like what Mouse used, which was similar to Tiger Ellison's with the tight slots. Now, what John Jenkins did is that he brought these slots out. So now you have more of a traditional spread type formation that we see in a lot of offenses today. Also, Coach Jenkins incorporated the superback more in the passing game, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But then obviously with Coach Davis, if you go the next tier, his obviously the person that's most synonymous with Mouse with the offense is Coach June Jones, who's been an assistant under Mouse with the Denver Gold, with the Houston Gamblers, with the Detroit Lions. Mouse was an assistant coach for him for the Atlanta Falcons when he was head coach. So obviously these two names are synonymous with each other as far as the history and development of the offense. The next thing I'm going to kind of go over is some of the foundations of the offense. And again, for me, if I was a musician, I would consider myself classically trained. So kind of the same thing with the run and shoot offense. I am more of a Mouse Davis purist, classically trained in the offense, even though that I have studied concepts from Kevin Gilbride. I had the blessing to work for Coach Manny Matsakis, who is the head coach at Defiance College in Defiance, Ohio, and the developer of the triple shoot offense. So I have researched different ideas from different coaches, but I am a classically trained run and shoot coach. So I'm like a lot of coaches, I'm still learning about Army and Navy and Thunder and Lightning and a lot of these other newer concepts that Coach Jones is using. So we'll talk about now is more, again, for coaches that don't know a lot about the foundations of the offense, coaches that may want to incorporate some things into their current offense, or someone that just wants to dive in and run the offense. All right, let's talk about the run and shoot offense versus a conventional style of offense. All right, we'll put the formation up here. All right. one of the things we talked about with a conventional offense is that, first, the design of the formation is making the defense concentrate on stopping the passing game, first and foremost. And then this creates better run lanes for the superback. Second of all, that the offense is designed to mirror itself. The personnel on each side of the ball will know each other's pass routes. So the receivers on the left are able to play on both sides of the ball. So, for instance, if you have an X receiver and a Z receiver goes down with an injury, you can have an X receiver play the Z position, or you can have, the left slot be able to play the right side. So that, again, helps with the offense and the repetitions of the offense. That with the nature of the half roll, and we'll talk about half roll. It's not a topic that a lot of coaches talk about nowadays, because most run shoot teams are gun teams now, and they don't use the traditional half roll as they did in the beginning of the nature of the offense. So like I said, with his half roll, that helps with the pass protection. And then especially in smaller schools with lesser guys, that you don't need huge, big offensive linemen to be able to run this offense. Kind of similar to the philosophy of coaches who run the wing T, because they don't have big offensive linemen. Now, again, we're just going to talk about some base stuff, and all of this can fluctuate. All right, formation. Now, as a general rule, these slots and again, we'll talk about tradition, the way that it was traditionally started. Now, again, a lot of coaches have changed these, but we're going to talk about some traditional things about the offense. Originally, these slots were 3 feet from the tackle. The superback, his heels were at 6 yards, and the split from the outside receiver to the tackle could be anywhere from 18 yards or more. From the center, 18 yards or more, based on if you were on a hash or in the middle of the field. So there was kind of some general principles of formation and width and things of that nature to be able to line up with. Personnel. When you're coming to your school, like I said, we'll talk or at the high school level, that the great thing about this offense is that, again, it allows you to use more skill players out there. So, for instance, in a traditional offense, and you have a tight end in a traditional offense. I'll just put him up here. You have a tight end, good athlete, can run, can catch the football. In the early days of the offense, those tight ends made great superbacks. So, for instance, so that's one way for you to be able to help kind of decide, your personnel and stuff. If you've got a really, really good tight end, he'll make a really good superback. And we'll talk about that, the reason from that in a little bit. Now, the same thing. If you've got, a bunch of good halfbacks that can run, can catch, things of that nature, they can play in the slots. They can play on the outside. So again, that kind of gives you, the ability to get the best players you can get on the field as possible. And so you're not limited. And if I'm an I formation team and I've got, 5 really good running backs, but I can only play one, now I can have 5 good running backs all over the field. All right, the reason why, and this changed basically when Barry Sanders went to the Detroit Lions, and the reason why we talk about tight ends as superbacks is that traditionally the superback was the 6th offensive lineman in pass protection. So there wasn't as big of an emphasis on him being a really elusive, fast type running back, someone like a Barry Sanders. So they were more helping in pass protection, and they'd have, some base run game that we'll talk about later on. So that's the reason why we talk about tight ends making good superbacks, for that specific reason, to have a good sturdy back in the backfield that can assist in pass protection. All right, let's talk about motion. Now, you can name this stuff whatever you want. Now, each of the 5 skill positions have a motion call. They have a left motion call and they have a right motion call. The 2 receivers on the left-hand side, their motion calls are 3-letter words. And the 2 receivers on the right-hand side, their motion calls are 4-letter words. Now, again, you can call them whatever you want. The 2 motion calls for the X are Lil and Rob. For the wing is Liz and Rip. For the Y slot is Load and Rose. Sorry, I ran out of space over here. For the Z receiver, it is Lark and Rook. And for the superback is Lion and Ram. So again, you can call these whatever you want, whatever best fits your offensive system. Again, this is kind of the origins, or kind of the history of where these motions have come from. And then with these motions, there's a lot of things that you can do with these motions, as far as going into trips, being in trips, going back to even, being wide and motioning into the formation. For instance, obviously, if you wanted to motion into trips, there's 2 ways that you can do it. motion into trips here, you could call rip, and we rip motion, and he'd motion into 3x1, or the same thing to the other side. If you ran load motion, trips into the left. Now, if you were going to motion from trips into an even formation, you would use the term early. So if we were in trips left and we wanted to motion to even, it would be early rip, because he's already over here. The wing's already over here. It'd be early rip, so it'd be early rip Liz motion. So he would motion across into even. Another way to use motion is if you wanted to motion into the formation and back out of the formation and still stay in even. And that would just be real simple. Say, for instance, with the wing, we wanted to motion him in. When he motions in, he would come to basically the inside leg of the guard and back out. So that would be considered rip Liz motion. Now again, you can call it, one word or however you want to do it. And that would be the same thing for the Y. If you wanted to bring him in and out, that would be load Rose motion. Now, obviously, if you wanted to use motion with the outside receivers, the X or the Z, you would have to have, either the wing or the Y on the line of scrimmage, which again, that's another way that you can do it. All right, for instance, we wanted to run Rob motion. We would put the wing on the line of scrimmage. We would step the X off. In Rob motion, we would motion the X in the trips. And it'd be the same thing with the other side. If we wanted to motion the Z in the trips to the left, we would put the Y on the line of scrimmage and we put the Y on the line of scrimmage and bring the Z back. And we'd run Lark motion and motion him into 3x1. The other motion that I like using is what they call Y, a call called Y. And so what that meant, say for instance, a different way to run trips is it would be wide, so the wing would be outside the Z. and then he would motion in to 2 trips, or he could motion all the way across the formation. I like using him out here and motioning him into the second position in 3-by-1 with certain pass routes. So that would be, like I said, that would be a wide call. And one of the reasons why they used motion back in the beginning of the offense was to help with trying to get a preliminary read or a pre-snap read on coverages, see if they could determine if it was cover 3 or blitz or what have you. So that was one of the early reasons for motion. So again, like for this, for instance, that would be considered an early. Let me get this here. Early rip wide, and then Liz motion. So again, the early rip, same thing as if he was over here in trips we talked about. Wide means that he's wider than the Z. And Liz motion, he can either motion him in here in a short motion or motion him across the field. So that's a different way of doing things. Same thing with the super back. You can motion him left or right, depending on the formation. And that's some of the things that Coach Jenkins likes to do. Or another thing he would do is either offset the super back, or what they would consider calling a up right or up left call is that they would bring the super back in as a tight slot. So there's some different things you can do in pass protection, things of that nature. All right, now let's kind of which is pretty similar to other teams. Let's talk about the numbering of the offense. Now, I do things a little differently than most coaches, I would say. For me personally, I don't number gaps. I number alignment because of in my particular style of the offense, I run a lot more zone runs, and so I number alignment instead of gaps. But traditionally, you had 0, 1, 3, 5, 7, and again you had the 2 gap, the 4, the 6, and the 8. And then in the run game, the super back was known as the 3 back, the wing was known as the 2 back, the Y was known as the 4 back, and the quarterback was known as the 1 back. So for instance, if you were running 32, obviously that would bend the super back running into the 2 hole. We'll talk about a little bit about the base run games and stuff a little bit after that. Now, let's talk about a topic that you don't really hear a lot about anymore, and that is the uncovered principle. What is the uncovered principle? I think nowadays you have more of the RPO game getting more involved with the run and shoot, so you don't maybe teach about the uncovered principle. Now, traditionally, the uncovered rule. Now, the uncovered rule is this. You have either him stationary or motioning him across what have you. You can have the uncovered rule two different ways. A, based on leverage. If you have a defender that's inside the slot, now again, we'll widen these slots out to a little bit more traditional way of doing things. One way of the uncovered rule. If I have leverage on an inside defender, that means that inside defender isn't lined up head up over me, and there is a significant amount of distance between me and him. Back in the more of the tradition of the offense, he's what's considered uncovered, and the quarterback would make the adjustment in the play that you would get a quick vertical burst, and the quarterback would raise up and hit that receiver on a quick vertical burst. You can do it that way. Same principle, for instance, that you motion a receiver across, and nobody is playing him over the top. Same thing. Quarterback can raise up. You're here. You're here. Quarterback raises up. Throws him the ball. Now, back in the early days, like I said, before RPOs and stuff, these are certain ways where you could take advantage of a defense that wouldn't line up, properly. Now, I've been with coaches that run it that way, with that quick vertical. Myself, because I've known situations where you get defenses that try to bait you into running that vertical, so they'll deliberately, for instance, they'll deliberately line up inside to know that that's how you throw your hot, and so they'll take advantage of it, and they'll play the apex between the two, knowing that you're going to throw this quick throw. And as soon as you see that quarterback raise up, he's going to buzz to try to knock that guy out before he can catch the ball. And that's the reason why myself personally, I've developed that more as a type of hitch or a stop or a smoke route, where if he's uncovered, the next quarterback just going to raise up and throw him the ball, and he's just going to turn his shoulders and give the quarterback a target to throw to. So I'm here. He catches the ball right away, and then he's getting vertical upfield as fast as he can. So that was kind of the reason why I went away from that quick vertical route as an uncovered, but there's nothing the matter with it. I just chose to do it this way because then our guys couldn't be baited into that check. All right, let's talk about the half roll. It's a topic that, again, a lot of coaches don't talk about in the run and shoot offense, because basically since the mid 90s, most run and shoot teams have went to the gun. But let's talk about that, for history standpoint, let's talk about the half roll. Now, it all depends if your quarterback's right-handed or left-handed. For our example today, we'll talk about the quarterback being right-handed. That first step number one, and you can watch, go to YouTube and watch the old Houston Gamblers TV game to watch Jim Kelly. That first step away from the center, the way that I coach this area is, for instance, a quarterback being on a clock, with 12 o'clock being here, 6 o'clock here, and so on. That first step is a huge punch step at 6 o'clock. It's a very exaggerated step. The reason for that is because with that big punch step, that was the quarterback's first initial opportunity to read coverage downfield. So that was basically like a read step. And going to the right, the quarterback would either throw off his third step, his fifth step, or his seventh step, depending on the pass route concept. And if he's a quarterback throwing to the left, which is really difficult because you have to really work on your quarterback as soon as he gets that first big initial punch step to get his shoulders cocked and turned. And some pass routes are a little bit more difficult than others for him to be able to do that. And again, for instance, Miles will talk about Jeff George with the Falcons. Jeff George could not half roll to the left. So he basically took an angle step to the left anytime. But for half roll to the right, again, you're either throwing off your fourth step, your sixth step, or your eighth step. So on your clock, basically, and I used to teach this with cones, set up cones for the quarterback to get around. So basically that first step is at 6 o'clock, and then his next step would be at 5 o'clock, and so on. Because if he's throwing off a fifth step, he should be setting up on the inside leg of the offensive tackle. And then seventh step and so on. And it would be in reverse if you had a left-handed quarterback. So this would be 3, 5, and 7 to the left, and this would be 4, 6, and 8 to the right. One of the great things about this offense is that you do not need a ton of plays to be successful in this offense. For instance, when I started coaching and learning this offense, I had 8 base pass plays that we worked with, and those were the choice, the go, a vertical game, switch, read, what some people call hook or smash, and curl. So those were the 8 pass plays that I ran. And the nice thing is that these 3 are basically sister plays that build off of each other. And then in the run game, traditionally in the offense, you have the dive, the draw, the um, quick trap, speed option, and then counter with the wing. Now, again, you can be as creative as you want in the run game. Now, these were kind of the 5 base running plays in the offense. But, you know, for instance, myself, I run trap, I run counter, I run counter tray. There's a lot of different things that I do in the run game myself personally compared to these 3 plays. Let's talk about when we install a pass concept. For instance, a choice or go or what have you. Before I ever teach the concept, we work on a couple of drills first. In my offense, there are some different route conversions that we use. The main one, obviously, is the seam read. With the seam read, our receiver has a landmark of 15 yards. And then what he does at that landmark is all based on coverage. He could be booking up, he could be going vertical, he could be running a post, or he could be running a dig based on the coverage, and that is the seam read. Another variation off that I use is called the streak read. Streak read is basically cuts a couple of the other aspects out. Streak read, when he gets to his landmark, is basically either a vertical or what we would consider a skinny post. Another one that in some past concepts that we use is called a fork read. And again, when he gets to his landmark, then he's got 3 options. Obviously, that it looks like a fork that he can either break vertically, he can either break inside, or he can break outside. And that's what we would consider a fork read. And then the last one is just an option route. And I learned a lot about option route from studying Kevin Gilbride when he was with the Houston Oilers. And that area is about 5 to 8 yards is his landmark. And he's got some different options. He's either got outside, inside, settle down, or settle down. And that's what we would consider an option. An option route. And like I said, his landmark is about 5 to 8 yards. So again, before we talk about any passing concept, we work on what I call a seam read drill. And all of your skill players need to learn how to run the seam read. If you're an outside receiver, you've got to learn to run the seam read. If you're an inside receiver, you've got to learn the seam read. So for instance, it would look like this. You'll have a quarterback here. You'll have a defensive back and he's at 12 yards. You'll have a group of receivers on the high school hash mark. You'll have a coach behind that defensive back, and he'll tell the defensive back at the snap of the ball which way to go. Now, here are what we consider the goalposts. Now, at the snap of the ball, the coach is either going to tell this defensive back to either drop straight back, go away from the receiver, or go towards the receiver. So he'll give him that call before the snap of the ball. So we talked about the seam read. Receiver gets to his landmark at 15 yards. If the defensive back is in the middle of the field, and what we consider the middle of the field is the width of the goalpost. So if the defensive back is anywhere within the confines of the width of the goalpost, that's considered the middle of the field. And when he gets to 15, he's going to throw up his outside arm. He's going to hook down and find the open window back to the quarterback. All right. He drops straight back. He's in the middle of the field. He's going to hook it up. Now, at the snap of the ball, the defensive back goes away from the receiver. The receiver is going to continue to go vertical upfield. If the defensive back goes towards the receiver, when the receiver gets to his landmark, he's going to snap across his face and run to green grass. All right, this is what we'll talk about later about running competitively to space. So he's going to run competitively to space to where the DB just vacated. Now, like again, all of our receivers do this. They go through it on this side and they go through it on this side. And then when we get really good at that, the next progression is that we add a second level defender. And now what we have to do is that we have to avoid the second level defender, get over the top, and get to our landmark. So that second level defender tries to wall us off, make contact with us in some way. You know, obviously we got to get around him, stack him, and get to our landmark. And then we go through the same progression. If the DB, goes to the middle of the field, away from us, or to us. Then when we get really good at that, then we add two safeties to the equation. Okay, two safeties. We read the safety to our side, because with safety play, it's like a chain reaction. If one moves, then the other one's got to move in some type of way to fill the void of the first safety's rotation. So, same thing. If both of these safeties drop straight back, say for instance like a true cover four, something of that nature, receiver's going to get to his landmark. He is going to hook it up and find the open window to the quarterback. If the safeties rotate, if this safety rotates away from me, and that safety rotates to the middle of the field, so some type of cloud or sky covered, something of that nature, that reverts back to our single safety high rule that with a safety in the middle of the field, I'm going to hook it up and find the open window back to the quarterback. If the safeties rotate away from me, then I'm going to continue vertical upfield. Okay. If the safeties split like they would in a cover two type of look, those two safeties split and get off the hash, then I'm going to snap it across his face tight and run the green grass to make sure that I'm far enough away from him where he doesn't become a factor in the pass concept. And then again, we run through this left and right. When we get real good at it, then again, we'll add a second level defender that we've got to avoid. And we run these drills and perfect these drills before we ever run a pass concept. Now, I will say this for the sake of 7-on-7 or different things like that in the beginning of installing. We'll install some base quick game routes, so we actually have something in 7-on-7 to be able to run against the defense. But it makes no sense to start running pass concepts until your receivers can master how to run a seam read properly. And again, it just takes repetition. I'll talk about two concepts here. Choice and go. Choice and go, you can basically put in any offense and be successful with it. Those, out of all the other, pass concepts, those can be successful again in any system. Choice. Now again, with teaching choice, you have to teach your outside receivers how to make a conversion again based on coverage. And when you teach this with the outside receivers, you always want to teach it against single safety high first, and then progress to a two safety high look. For instance, the single receiver, he has the choice route. Now, traditionally, if your quarterback was under center and running a true half roll, then his conversion point was based on 7 steps. So here's the difference between gun and half roll. So if the quarterback was half rolling, he got to his launch point, which would be his sixth step. So he would make a decision on what he's going to do based off his 7th step. And that is all based off of the defensive back. Now, obviously, first of all, when we attack the defensive back, we always want to attack his outside. If this defensive back is five yards or more by the time he gets to his 7th step, then the receiver is going to run an out route. Okay? If If the defensive back is 3 yards or less by the time he gets to his 7th step, then he is going to break a skinny post. And that's against single safety high. Now, with 2 safety high, traditionally, it was an automatic outside release against 2 safety high, just automatic outside release. Myself, I teach it very similar to the same progression as single safety high in this manner, because nowadays you get so many different coverages that you can see out of 2 safety high. We talk about the same principles, is same thing. If that corner sinking like a cover 4, if he gets to his 7th step and he is 5 yards or more, then he's running the out. If he's 3 yards or less, then he is working with an outside release vertical upfield. If it's straight man coverage, he is going vertical upfield. Now, in the gun, the quarterback will use an angle drop, and now instead of 7 steps, the outside receiver makes a determination by 5 steps. Because if you still, and I learned this from Coach Matsakis, that if you still use 7 steps as the rule, basically the quarterback's got to wait on the receiver to make a decision, and by the time he makes that decision, he should be flipping his hips and going to the backside anyway. All right, we'll talk about the choice route again against for better purposes, single safety high. Also, I forgot to mention blitz. I consider a blitz is anything coming off the perimeter, and dogs is anything that's in the box, because we should be able to control anything in the box based off from our pass protection. So, for instance, we've got a defender here. We're running choice, and he comes hot here. Then again, we're going to do what's called replacing the blitzer. He's going to take a 3-step and slant and replace this blitzer. So that's the perimeter blitz conversion with choice. Okay, now we'll put the whole package together. All right, we got the quarterback with a half roll. Okay, we've got just a standard 4-2 defense. All right, snap of the ball. Next receiver. has his three options. He's got the choice. With the quarterback, if there is any indecision in your mind about what the X receiver or the single receiver is going to do, then you will automatically go to the backside of the route. And this is what we have on the backside. Okay, on the backside, and I always number my receivers outside in, so that would be backside 1, backside 2, backside 3. Backside 3 has a shallow cross, and his job is to control the linebackers in here. So, for instance, if we get a linebacker who dogs, he'll make a hot call to the quarterback. He'll call hot, 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 and he'll settle in that hole of where that linebacker vacated. If it's man coverage, he's just running straight across. All right, now again, backside 2, he's got the seam read. So he's reading what the free safety's doing. And so that'll either be A, hooking up, going vertical, running a post to green grass, or if it's some type of man coverage, then he's running a dig. Frontside 1, it's got a mandatory outside release, and he has the option that if he gets to about 10 to 12 yards, and he cannot break down the cushion of the corner, then again, at about 10 to 12, he can throw up his outside arm and just work his way into the open area. Now, the quarterback's read is this, his progression. He is reading 1 to 2 to 3. So that's the quarterback's progression. He's reading 1 to 2 to 3. So he's reading choice, the seam read, the shallow cross. So this is how you build your offense. If you hear the term special, okay, special means that number 3 and number 2 exchange responsibilities. So again, this is how you build your offense. So now if I run choice special, again, we have the choice here. We have the outside mandatory release. Now, special. Now, the wing is running the shallow cross, and the Y is running the seam read. And again, the read progression for the quarterback doesn't change. He's still reading 1 to 2 to 3. And then there's other ways to combine switch or hook or different things of that nature. But there again, you've got 2 different pass routes with the same concept, and it's the same read for the quarterback. let's talk about the go route. The go route is what I consider the gold standard of run and shoot pass routes. That you'll hear Coach Davis talk about when all else fails, run rip 60Z go. And I've been in situations coaching where I've tried to figure out, a play. What am I going to call? What am I going to call? And then I'll hear that in the back of my mind. I said, all right, well, let's run rip 60Z go. Okay. With the go route is different than some of the other routes. One thing that you have to understand is the difference between landmark pass routes and coverage pass routes. Pass routes like vertical, switch, read, choice special, those are what's called landmark routes because the landmarks are the high school hash marks. Now, the go route, the slide, those are what you would consider coverage routes. So you don't have to necessarily worry about landmarks. So again, like I said, you got to understand the difference between coverage routes and landmark routes. And again, landmark routes, that's choice, that is vertical, that's switch, that's read. Those are landmark routes. Smash, hook, again, slide, go, curl. In my offense, those are coverage routes. So let's talk about go. And we'll talk about the differences with go as far as being underneath center and go with the quarterback in the shotgun. That with go with the quarterback underneath the center, it's a faster route. The ball gets out of the quarterback's hands faster. So, for instance, when I run this route, I have number 2 run, again, what we talked about, a streak read, because I want him to get vertical upfield as fast as he can. With going to the gun, it's my understanding with Coach Jones and Coach Rolovich and some of the other coaches, they made that into a true seam read. So it took longer to develop with the quarterback in the gun with the angle drop. But we'll talk about the quarterback being underneath center and running the half roll. All right, with the go route, outside receiver has mandatory outside release. So front side 1 is mandatory release. Now you can get real complicated with the defenders over these guys. I mean, you can get really complicated in the senses, or are these defenders playing, out inside outside? Are they playing outside outside? Are they playing inside inside? So you can get really, really complicated with stuff like that. I don't necessarily get as complicated with it for the sake of purpose today. We won't necessarily worry about that. So again, underneath center. This is one of the true routes, the underneath center and the half roll, that the quarterback is throwing on the move. So he'll be either throwing the ball off his 3rd step, his 5th step, or his 7th step. And by the time he gets to his 9th step and he hasn't thrown the ball, then more than likely he's going to be a runner. All right, we'll work on this with single safety high. Important thing here, the splits. All right, the splits between these two guys can be no more than 5 yards in width apart and no less then no less than 2 yards apart. And the reason for that is because of the natural rub. Anything else more than that, you don't get the natural rub to it. So again, the split between these two, no wider than 5, no closer than 2. Number 2, outside release. He's working on the outside shoulder for the flat defender. And again, with the streak read compared to the seam read, he's got 2 options based on what that free safety is going to do. He's either going to continue to go vertical upfield, or if that safety tries to climb over the top of him, then he's going to snap it across his face in the green grass. Now, well, again, I picked up from Coach Mansakis. What we do here with number 3 running the shoot route, that we give him an imaginary cone at 10 yards. And when we first teach the shoot route, we do use a cone and have him run to that cone at 10 yards. So he's angling at 10 yards. Now, his rule is that if he is starting to run out of space, which means by the time he gets to the bottom of the numbers, if he hasn't received the ball before he's gotten to the bottom of the numbers or has gotten a pump fake from the quarterback, then he has a secondary route where he works up the sideline. Now, the quarterback's read is pretty simple per se in this, is that he's reading the flat defender. If that flat defender opens his hips towards front side 3 running the shoot route, then he knows that he's going to throw that ball to the wing and or front side 2 in the seam. That you really want to try to hit him in that 10 to 12 yard area and really get the ball out of your hand fast before he becomes a part of the play. Now, the difference in this play in the shotgun is this. Again, in the shotgun, it becomes a more traditional seam read. So he's going to work on that outside shoulder, get to his landmark, at 15. So again, the quarterback is taking his angle drop. And now it becomes more, again, a true seam read with the quarterback in the gun. But his read is the same. Again, if he sinks to the seam read, he's hitting the shoot. If he opens his hip to take the shoot away, we're hitting front side 2 on the seam read. Now, especially with cover 2 teams in the gun, and why this becomes takes a little bit more time to develop. A lot of times, quarterbacks, when they see this and they're going to throw it to number 2, they make this a back shoulder throw at about 10 to 12 yards to protect him from that half-field safety. Now, if they continue in the progression, obviously he's going to run his seam read conversion. But that's one of the big differences in him being in the gun and using an angle drop compared to being underneath center. Again, When he sees that defender's jumping the shoot route, he's going to make that a back shoulder throw to protect the slot receiver. One, two, again, there's some certain things that you always want to talk to your players about, for instance, your receivers, that some terms that you always want to speak with them about. One is catching the ball in the noose. You always want to talk to your receivers about catching the ball in the noose. And whether it's here, what have you, always keep that in their minds, catch the ball in the noose. Another term is that they have to win their individual matchups, especially in man coverage. You have to win your individual matchups. The next one is you have to run competitively to space. And these last two things I just talked about, that's why the New England Patriots do such a great job in the passing game, is that they have receivers that understand how to run competitively to space and understand how to win their individual matchups. Another term is that we talk about with the quarterback is that the slot is always open. That no matter what the situation is, the slot is always open. And something that you always want to talk in their minds about is that the run and shoot offense is engineered for comebacks. So no matter where you are in a situation in a game or how far you're down, you have the ability to come back and win games. Other offenses that are predominantly run type of offenses, like a wing T offense or a option team, those offenses are not built or designed to come back and win games. They're great offenses if you're in the game in striking distance or you're ahead in the game, but they are not engineered for comebacks. And those are some terms that we always want to talk to your players about in concerning this offense. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the myth of the Oilers-Bills playoff game and how basically that game a lot of people look at as the downfall of the run and shoot in the NFL. The surprising thing about that game is that the Oilers led in every offensive category in that game other than total rushing yards. For instance, the Oilers were 22 carries for 82 yards, and the Bills were 26 carries for 98 yards. Warren Moon was 36 for 50 for 371 yards with 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Frank Reich was 21 for 34 for 289 yards with 4 touchdown passes and 1 interception. The Oilers had a total offense of 429 yards. The Bills had a total offense of 366 yards. That the Bills ran a total of 72 plays. The Oilers ran 72 plays. The Buffalo Bills ran 66 plays. Time of possession, the big thing that everybody talks about, time of possession. The Oilers led the game in time of possession with 37 minutes and 39 seconds. Now, the Oilers did not lead in total rushing, but they did have the leading rusher in the game. Lorenzo White had 19 carries for 75 yards, and the Bills' leading rusher was Ken Davis, who had 13 carries for 68 yards. And if you really look at the film in the second half, it was more of a collapse by the defense and the special teams by the Oilers. For instance, the Oilers defense gave up 4 touchdowns in the third quarter. And so people that like to say, certain things about the offense, that it's not good for time of possession or things of that nature, or, they can't hold leads or things of that nature. For people who like to play statistical football, there's the stats that it wasn't the Oilers' run and shoot offense that failed the Oilers in the game. It was more of a collapse on defense and special teams. That this is just a few things about the run and shoot offense that I've been able to share with you today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at any time. My cell phone number is 561-886-8328. That's my cell phone number. Or you can send me an email at Coach W. Anderson at hotmail.com. Those are two ways that you can get in contact with me. Also, if you want to find out a little bit more about me, even though we're in the process of updating it, you can go to coachwanderson.com, and you can find a little bit more about me there. I really appreciate Coach having me on today. And again, the run and shoot offense, in my opinion, is the best offense ever created. It's the offense that I choose to coach. I've been blessed to coach in other offenses, and I've studied different offenses, but it's by far, when you have lesser talent, you have the ability to compete against more talented teams. There's those days where you just get beat by a better team, but I've always felt that the run and shoot offense is giving people the ability to compete. And again, thank you very much. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me anytime.